My world turned upside down when I found out that my wife had decided to carry a child for her at the request of her sister. You will be shocked how karma turned against her. Let's get started. I still struggle to wrap my head around the whole thing sometimes. Technically, Emma, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and I are still legally married, but only because the system insists on dragging things out. In our state, you have to be separated for a full 12 months before a divorce can actually go through. Honestly, at this point, it just feels like a formality, a frustrating delay to the inevitable. During this so-called cooling-off period, Emma was supposed to find a place of her own nearby, something that would make our 50-50 custody arrangement for the kids easier. But why are we getting divorced in the first place? Well, that all goes back to Emma's twin sister, Sarah, and her absolutely brilliant idea. See, Sarah and her husband, Jason, had been struggling to have a baby for a while. And instead of going the usual routes, like, I don't know, hiring a professional surrogate, adopting, or literally any other reasonable option, they decided Emma was the perfect choice to carry their child. The logic? Because Emma and Sarah are identical twins, it would be practically the same as Sarah having the baby herself. And the worst part? Nobody even bothered to tell me about this plan until way later. Turns out, this whole thing had been in the works for weeks, maybe even months, before I caught so much as a hint of it. There was no conversation, no heads up, no hey, Ethan, let's talk this through. That would have been too rational, I guess. Instead, Emma just casually dropped it into conversation one night like she was talking about weekend plans. I remember the exact moment. We were sitting on the couch, her scrolling through her phone like it was just another normal evening. Then, completely out of nowhere, she says, "So, I've been thinking about doing something really important for Sarah." I barely glanced up. Yeah? What kind of important thing? That's when she finally looked at me. I'm going to be her surrogate. At first, I thought she was messing with me. I let out this half laugh, waiting for the punchline. But there wasn't one. She just sat there, watching me expectantly, like I was supposed to smile and congratulate her. Wait, what? I sat up straighter, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. You're actually going to carry their baby? She nodded, smiling like she'd just told me she was volunteering at an animal shelter. Yeah. Sarah and Jason have been trying for so long, and since we're identical, it's basically like Sarah's carrying the baby herself. My stomach dropped. Emma, are you serious? When did this even come up? She shrugged, completely unfazed. A few weeks ago. We've been talking about it for a while. I just stared at her, my brain scrambling to keep up. And at no point did you think to bring this up to me. Emma let out a sigh and set her phone down, clearly annoyed. Ethan, this isn't about you. It's my body, my choice. I don't need permission. I blinked, trying to process that. Permission? Emma, we're married. This isn't some minor decision. This is huge. It affects both of us. How could you not think to talk to me first? She rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. I'm telling you now. Oh, great, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Now? After you've already made up your mind. That's not how marriage works, Emma. Her expression hardened. Look, I knew you'd react like this. That's why I waited. But this is happening, whether you support me or not. I let out a long breath, shaking my head. So that's it. Either I just get on board with it, or what? She crossed her arms. Or maybe we need to rethink things. And there it was. The unspoken ultimatum. She didn't have to spell it out. Her meaning was crystal clear. Get with the program, or get lost. I couldn't believe it. It wasn't just the surrogacy itself that got to me, though yeah, that was a huge part of it. It was the fact that they'd planned all of this behind my back. Emma, Sarah, and Jason had been scheming for weeks, maybe longer, without even giving me a heads up. And now I was supposed to just accept it, no questions asked? I looked at her for a long moment, letting the weight of it all settle in. Then I said, if you go through with this, we're done. Her face twisted in frustration. You're being so unreasonable. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. I'm being unreasonable? Emma, you're making a life-altering decision without even considering me. You don't think that's a problem? She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. I'm doing something beautiful for my sister. I thought you'd understand. I stood up, raking a hand through my hair. Yeah, well, I guess I don't. Fast forward a few months, and surprise, Emma's pregnant. When she told me, I didn't argue, didn't yell. I just nodded, said, okay, and walked out of the room. 2 days later, I filed for divorce. The papers had already been drafted. I'd written them up the same week she first dropped this bombshell on me. I just needed to wait for her to actually follow through. And apparently, when I did file, everyone acted completely blindsided. Emma, in particular, looked like she never saw it coming, which blows my mind. Did she really think I was bluffing? That I'd just get over it and be totally fine with my wife carrying another man's child? I told her exactly what would happen if she went through with this, and yet, here we were. Sarah and Jason weren't any better. They tried guilt-tripping me, throwing every cliché they could think of at me. "You're abandoning your wife," Sarah said, shaking her head like I was some kind of monster. "She needs your support now more than ever." I let out a bitter laugh. She made this choice, not me. Jason, ever the diplomat, tried a softer approach. "Ethan, this is a beautiful thing she's doing for us. Don't you see that?" "Oh, I see it," I said, folding my arms. "I see that you two wanted a baby, and Emma decided to make it happen, without even talking to me first. That's not a marriage. That's not a partnership. That's just her deciding something huge all on her own. And now she gets to live with the consequences." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "You vowed to stand by her no matter what. And she vowed to respect me and not make life-changing decisions behind my back." I shot back. "So here we are." And that was that. The papers were filed, and the separation officially began. At first, Emma acted like she didn't care. She kept that same smug, self-righteous attitude, like she was above it all. "I don't need you," she said one night when I told her I was done talking about it. "I can handle this on my own." "Great," I said. "Then do that." But as time passed, reality started catching up to her. That confidence? That certainty? It started to crack. Once the divorce papers were in, the tension in the house became unbearable. Emma kept acting like nothing had changed, like I was still supposed to care about her pregnancy, like I was somehow supposed to be involved. But I had already checked out. Why would I invest a single ounce of energy into a pregnancy that wasn't mine? A pregnancy that was the exact reason our marriage was falling apart? And of course, she didn't move out. Finding a new place wasn't easy, especially while pregnant. She kept saying she wanted to stay close for the kids' sake. But let's be real, this was about her convenience, not theirs. Every time she needed something, Emma still expected me to act like her husband, like nothing had changed. One night, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when she strolled in. "Can you run to the store for me?" I didn't even bother looking away from the screen. "For what?" "Pickles," she said, then added, "and maybe some ice cream." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. "Yeah, no, that's not my job anymore." She let out a dramatic sigh, like I was being totally unreasonable. "Ethan, come on, it's just a quick trip." That's when I finally turned to face her. "Emma, I'm not your husband anymore. Go ask Sarah. Or Jason." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she just turned on her heel and walked away. As the weeks passed, she started dropping hints complaining about how hard things were, how much stress she was under, how exhausting it was to do everything on her own. At first, I ignored it. I mean, what exactly was she expecting? That I'd swoop in like I had during her other pregnancies? Because those were different. Those were our kids. This was something she and her sister cooked up all on their own. I never agreed to it. I never signed up for any of it. Eventually, though, she stopped being subtle and just flat out started complaining. "I don't know how I'm supposed to do this without you," she said one evening, rubbing her belly like that was somehow going to make me care. I barely looked up from my laptop. "Call Sarah. Call Jason." She sighed in frustration. "It's not fair that I have to go through this alone." That got my attention. I shut my laptop and finally looked at her. "Fair? You really want to talk about fair? Because I don't think it was fair for you to make this decision without me. But here we are." She didn't have an answer for that. Just pressed her lips together and turned away. I kept telling her the same thing over and over. Sarah and Jason were the ones who wanted this baby. They were the ones who swore up and down that this whole surrogacy thing was going to be this amazing, beautiful journey. So let them deal with it. But, of course, they were nowhere to be found most of the time. Jason, in particular, was starting to fade into the background. Oh, he showed up for the big moments, doctor's appointments, a few baby-related errands, but day-to-day? Nowhere to be seen. One night, just out of pure curiosity, I asked, "Where's Jason been lately?" Thought he was supposed to be all in on this. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "He's been taking care of Sarah," she mumbled. "She's still recovering from the accident." Okay, fair enough. I wasn't heartless. I knew Sarah had been in a car accident. But still, it wasn't like this pregnancy was some sudden surprise. He knew this was coming. Shouldn't he have planned for it? Emma's expression tightened. "He's doing his best. He's under a lot of stress right now." I scoffed. "Yeah? And you're not." She didn't answer, but her silence said everything. She didn't want to admit it, But Jason had already started pulling back. He had an easy out, and he was taking it. Meanwhile, Emma was turning to me more and more, like I was supposed to step in and pick up the slack. It started small, asking me to carry groceries, put together the crib, even rub her back when she was sore. Every single time, I shut it down. Ethan, can you help me with this? Nope. Can you? Not my kid. Not my problem. Then, one night, it all came to a head. She was sitting on the couch, rubbing her belly and sighing dramatically, clearly fishing for attention. I ignored her for as long as I could, but eventually she couldn't help herself. You know, she said, her voice laced with irritation, you're still my husband. You could at least pretend to care. That was it. I snapped. No, Emma, I'm not your husband anymore. Not in any way that actually matters, I said, standing up. You made your choice when you decided to go behind my back and do this. Don't come crying to me now just because you're realizing it's harder than you thought. Call Jason. Call Sarah. Call literally anyone else. But leave me out of it. Her face crumpled, and just like that, the tears started flowing. That had become her go-to move anytime things didn't go her way. But at this point, I was immune to it. I'm going to bed, I said flatly, walking away as she sat there sobbing on the couch. The next few weeks? More of the same. She kept trying to guilt me into helping, and I kept shutting her down. But it wasn't just about setting boundaries, though that was definitely part of it. It was about principle. Because the second I gave in, even a little, Emma would take it as a sign that I was softening. And then I'd never be able to get out from under her constant demands. Then the baby was born. And that's when things took another turn. I stayed out of it completely. Didn't go to the hospital. Didn't visit. Nothing. And I had told her ahead of time that I wouldn't be involved, so it wasn't like she hadn't been warned. Still, she called me from the hospital, crying. Ethan, please, she sobbed into the phone. I don't want to do this alone. I'm scared. I kept my voice calm steady. You made the choice to have another man's baby. That was your decision, Emma. Don't drag me into it now. Jason put that baby in you. Call him. She let out a shaky breath. I did. He's not picking up. Then call Sarah. Call your mother. This is their problem, not mine. You're being cruel, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. I sighed. No, Emma. I'm keeping my word. You knew where I stood before any of this happened. She didn't respond. A second later, the line went dead. And then she came home with the baby. And that's when the real chaos started. It was like she thought that once the baby was actually here, it would change something. That I'd suddenly care. That I'd magically flip a switch and decide to be involved. Spoiler alert, I didn't. She started leaving baby stuff all over the house, bottles on the counter, diapers on the couch, like some kind of psychological warfare to force me to acknowledge it. But I didn't bite. I just stepped over the mess and went about my day. Then came the nights. The baby would cry, and Emma would come knocking on my door. Ethan, please, just this once. Can you help? She begged, her voice exhausted. No. She let out a frustrated huff. For God's sake, it's 3 a.m. I haven't slept in days. I didn't even roll over. Your baby, your problem? Now go deal with it. Silence. Then I heard her stomp off down the hall. The next day, she slammed cabinets and muttered under her breath about what a terrible person I was. And yeah, I'll admit, there were moments when I felt a twinge of guilt. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because the baby was innocent in all of this. It wasn't the kid's fault that their parents were a mess. But at the same time, I knew that if I stepped in even once, it would just give Emma an excuse to keep leaning on me instead of the people who actually wanted this baby. And then came the final straw. The moment she outright demanded that I step up. You can't just pretend this isn't happening, she said. One evening, she stood in front of me, the baby in her arms, looking exhausted and furious all at once. It's not fair that I'm doing everything on my own, she snapped. I barely glanced up from my laptop. Then called Jason. I did, she shot back. He's busy with Sarah. Again. I just shrugged. Not my baby. Not my problem. Her eyes blazed with anger. You were so goddamn selfish. You owe me this much. That made me pause. I set my laptop aside and met her glare head on. I don't owe you anything, I said, my voice flat and steady. She let out a frustrated, almost hysterical laugh. You're acting like I cheated on you, she screamed. I stood up, my patience officially gone. I don't care if you slept with your kid's father or if you didn't, I said, my voice calm but firm. The fact is, you disrespected me. You got pregnant with another man's baby behind my back. I warned you. I told you I was against it, and you did it anyway. And now? There are consequences. You said it was your body, Your choice. Well, now it's my life, my choice. This is your responsibility, Emma. Deal with it. And that? That was the moment she finally cracked. You're a heartless monster, she spat, her voice shaking with rage. One day, you're going to regret this. Then she stormed off. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end of it. But of course, an hour later, she was back, a bag slung over her shoulder and the baby bundled up in her arms. I can't do this, she said, her voice trembling. Not with you acting like this. I just nodded. She stood there, staring at me, waiting, like she thought I might try to stop her. I didn't. 2 days later, she left with the baby. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was quiet. No crying. No guilt trips. No arguments. Just peace. I wasn't naive enough to think she was gone for good, but for those first couple of days, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. But, of course, nothing with Emma is ever that simple. The calls started the next morning. First from her mom. Then Sarah. Yes, the same sister who orchestrated this whole disaster. Then even Sarah's husband, Jason. It was like they had a group chat where they coordinated their guilt trip strategy. Every single one of them had the same script. Emma was overwhelmed. The baby was innocent. I needed to step up for the sake of the family. Sarah, naturally, was the most relentless. She left a long voicemail, dripping with self-righteous fury. I cannot believe how heartless you are, Ethan, she said, her voice sharp with disgust. Emma just gave birth, and you abandoned her at the most vulnerable time of her life. Is this really who you are? Do you even have a soul? I scoffed and deleted the message without even bothering to reply. What was the point? This wasn't some unexpected pregnancy that we had both planned for. This was Emma's choice. A choice she made without consulting me. A choice I told her loud and clear I wouldn't support. Then Jason called. The actual father of the baby. And suddenly, he wanted to play the concerned party. Man, things are really tough right now, he said, his voice oozing with fake sympathy. Sarah's still recovering from the accident, and Emma's struggling. We're all family, man. We should be supporting each other. I nearly laughed. The audacity of this guy. Family. I repeated, incredulous. Are you joking? You barely lifted a damn finger during the pregnancy, and now you want to act like we're all in this together. That's not fair, he protested. I'm trying. Try harder, I cut him off. This isn't my problem. Step up and take care of your own kid. Then came Emma's mom. Normally, she's the reasonable one in the family, but even she was on Emma's side this time. I just don't understand you, Ethan, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. Emma is still your wife, and you. No, she's not, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. She stopped being my wife the moment she decided to have another man's baby. If you're so worried about her, maybe you should be the one helping her. Silence. Then a quiet click as she hung up. And I think that's when it finally hit them. I wasn't going to cave. A couple of days passed, and then, like clockwork, Emma came back. I knew she would eventually, but I wasn't prepared for the scene she brought with her. She walked in like she hadn't just cursed me out and stormed off days ago. The baby was strapped to her chest in one of those carrier slings, her face drawn and exhausted, but still full of defiance. She was gearing up for another round. We need to talk, she announced, standing in the middle of the living room like she was about to give a TED Talk. I didn't even look up from what I was doing. About what? She gestured vaguely at the baby, like I didn't already know what this was about. You can't just ignore us forever. I'm not ignoring you, I said evenly. I've been very clear. This is your responsibility, not mine. And that was all she needed to launch into another long-winded speech about how hard it was being a single mom, how unfair it was that she had to do everything alone. She kept saying things like this isn't what I signed up for, and I never thought you'd turn your back on me like this. I just sat there and let her talk. Because what was the point? She wasn't looking for a real conversation. She wasn't looking for solutions. She just wanted someone to blame. When she finally ran out of steam, I met her gaze and said, You signed up for this the moment you decided to carry their baby. Don't act like this is my fault. That set her off. She started yelling, her face twisted in frustration. You're being cruel, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm going through. You think this is easy for me. The baby started wailing, probably because she was screaming so damn loud. She turned to me snapping, Are you just going to sit there? Do something. I shrugged. Not my baby, not my problem. Her face turned red, and she stormed off to the bedroom, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. The baby kept crying, but I didn't move. If she wanted to throw a tantrum, fine. But I wasn't going to let her dump this mess on me. That night, she tried a different approach. Instead of yelling, she came into the kitchen while I was making dinner and played nice. She leaned against the counter, watching me cook, her voice softer, almost hesitant. I miss the way things used to be, she said after a long silence. I kept chopping vegetables, not even glancing at her. That makes one of us. She sighed, stepping closer. I mean it, Ethan. I still love you. I want us to be a family again. I scoffed, finally turning to face her. A family? I raised an eyebrow. This was a family. You threw that away. Emma swallowed hard, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I made a mistake, she whispered. I set the knife down on the counter and crossed my arms. Yeah, I said, my voice flat. You did. She nodded, took a shaky breath, and finally muttered, I'm sorry. But even in her apology, there was no real accountability. She wasn't apologizing for what she did, just for how it all turned out. She wasn't sorry for betraying my trust, for making a life-altering decision without me. She was just sorry that now she had to deal with the consequences. That ship has sailed, I told her, my voice cold and steady. You made your decision. Now you have to live with it. Her shoulders started shaking, and she broke down again, choking out through her sobs, I don't want to get divorced. I can't do this alone. I exhaled, already exhausted by the conversation. You don't have to do it alone, I said. You have Sarah. You have Jason. But that wasn't what she wanted to hear. She didn't want their help. She wanted mine. She wanted me to swoop in, pick up the pieces, and fix everything like I always had before. Not this time. I turned to her and said, You don't want a divorce, not because you love me. If you did, you wouldn't have done this despite my warnings. You got pregnant by another man, Emma. That tells me everything I need to know about how much you actually cared about me. You don't want to lose me. You want to keep your comfortable life, the stability I provided. But let me give you some advice. Get used to being alone. Get used to dealing with your mess on your own. Because this divorce? It's happening. And soon, that stability you're clinging to? It'll be gone. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear her crying in the next room. I didn't feel good about it. But I didn't feel bad either. I felt nothing. And that's when I knew for sure it was over. Whatever love, whatever connection we once had, was long gone. She had burned it to the ground with her choices. The next morning, she made one last desperate attempt. She came to me, dark circles under her eyes, looking absolutely wrecked. The baby was in her arms, fussing softly. Please, she whispered, her voice raw. Just hold her for a little while so I can sleep. I haven't had more than 2 hours in days. For a second, I almost caved. Almost. But then I thought about everything, how she had lied, how she had betrayed me, how she had dragged me into a mess I never agreed to. No, I said. Her eyes widened, stunned. What? Call Jason, I told her. He's the father. He should be helping you. She looked like I had just slapped her across the face. Her lip trembled, tears welling up in her eyes. You really hate me that much, don't you? I shook my head. I don't hate you, I said, my voice steady. But I'm not going to let you guilt me into cleaning up your mess. This isn't my responsibility, and I'm done pretending it is. She left again after that. And this time, I had a feeling it was for good. Later that day, her mom called, letting me know Emma was staying with her. I just nodded and said, That's probably for the best. Maybe now I could finally have some peace. But of course, nothing with Emma is ever that easy. 3 days after she left, things quieted down. The house was empty, sure, but not peaceful. There was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And sure enough, it did. About a week after she moved out, the letters and emails started rolling in. Emma's family, in full force. It wasn't just the usual guilt trips. I was used to those by now. This was more aggressive. A coordinated effort, like they thought if they came at me from enough angles, they'd wear me down. Emma's mom sent a long, dramatic letter about how I was being unreasonable, how family always comes first, and how I needed to step up. She went on and on about how hard Emma had it growing up, how much she had sacrificed, and how I owed it to her to support her now. I read it, sighed, and tossed it straight in the trash. What was I supposed to do with that? They'd been pushing this Ethan is the bad guy narrative from the beginning. At this point, it was just noise. Sarah and Jason, on the other hand, took a more direct approach. Jason actually had the nerve to show up at my house, unannounced one evening. The second I opened the door and saw him standing there, looking all awkward, I knew this wasn't going to go well. Hey, man, he said, trying to sound casual. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. About what? He shifted on his feet like he wasn't sure whether to come in or turn around and leave. Finally, he sighed. About the baby. About everything, really. I didn't budge. Say what you need to say. He actually looked surprised, like he thought I was going to invite him in. Not a chance. He started rambling, going on about how hard things had been since Sarah's accident, how he was trying to juggle everything, and how he really needed me to step up and help, for Emma's sake. For Emma's sake, I repeated, cutting him off. My voice was sharp, and I saw him flinch. This has nothing to do with me. That's your baby. Your wife's sister agreed to this, knowing exactly what it meant. Why are you even here? He looked flustered. It's not just about the baby, he said, grasping for some kind of argument. It's about family. We're all connected in this. I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, we're not. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him continue. You, Sarah, and Emma made this decision without me. You went behind my back. You excluded me. And now you're acting like I owe you something? I shook my head. Get real. He tried to argue, but I was done. Leave, I said, stepping back inside. And don't come back unless it's to take full responsibility for your kid. He didn't like that answer, but he didn't have much of a choice. He stood there for a moment, his jaw tight, then muttered something about how I'd regret this before turning and walking away. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. Either way, not my problem. And just when I thought things might finally settle down, Emma pulled another stunt. She was still at her mom's, and for a brief moment, I actually thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally starting to accept reality. Nope. Instead, she started using the kids as leverage. One night, she called and asked if she could come over to spend time with them. Of course I said yes. I wasn't about to keep them from their mother. But when she showed up, it was obvious she had an agenda. She spent the whole evening going on about how exhausted she was, how hard it was being on her own, how the baby kept her up all night. And then, she dropped the real bomb. She wanted to move back in. Just until I can figure things out, she said. I shut that down immediately. No. Her face fell. Ethan, please. It's not just about me. The kids need their mother. They have their mother, I said. But they don't need you living here. You're still their mom, Emma. But that doesn't mean you get to move back in. She let out a sharp breath, crossing her arms. This isn't fair, to them, to me. You're the one keeping our family apart. I scoffed. No, you did that. You threw away our marriage for your sister. You don't get to act like a victim now. And for the first time, I saw something different in her eyes. Up until now, it had been sadness, frustration, desperate guilt-tripping. But this was anger. Real, seething anger. You'll regret this one day, she spat. I promise you. Then she grabbed her things and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The weeks that followed were surprisingly calm. I found a rhythm with the kids, focusing on keeping things as normal as possible for them. They asked about their mom sometimes, why she wasn't living with us, why everything had changed. I kept my answers short and simple. Mom and I are figuring things out, I'd say. But we both love you very much. It wasn't exactly a lie. I still loved my kids more than anything, and I knew Emma did too, in her own way. But that didn't change the fact that we were now on two completely separate paths. She had made her choice, and I wasn't going to be the one to fix it for her. And honestly, without her in the house, I felt lighter. I hadn't realized how much I had been holding my breath around her, always waiting for the next argument, the next guilt trip, the next emotional meltdown. Without all of that weighing me down, it was just me and the kids, figuring things out one step at a time. And for the first time in a long time, that felt good. But, of course, peace never lasts when Emma's involved. The divorce battle. The legal process officially kicked off, and with it came a whole new level of frustration. Emma's lawyer tried to paint me as the unreasonable one, saying I had abandoned her when she needed me most, that I had refused to help with the baby. My lawyer wasn't buying it. The baby isn't his, he stated plainly. He has no obligation to help. And Emma made the decision to go through with this despite his objections. It was a mess, but I wasn't worried. I had proof. Texts, emails, voicemails, everything showing that Emma knew exactly what she was doing, that I had set my boundaries from the very start. Still, dealing with it was exhausting. Every time I thought I was done with the drama, something new would pop up. Emma's family kept reaching out, trying to guilt me into making things right. Even Sarah and Jason, yes, the people responsible for this entire disaster, tried to mediate like they had any right to tell me how to live my life. I ignored them. I had spent years cleaning up Emma's messes, and I wasn't about to start again. And through all of this, one thing became crystal clear. I was done. Done with the guilt. Done with the manipulation. done with constantly being dragged into problems that weren't mine to fix. For the first time in forever, I felt like I actually had control over my own life. And no matter how much Emma or her family tried to pull me back into their mess, I wasn't going to let them. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild, to focus on the things that actually mattered, my kids, my own happiness, and a future that wasn't weighed down by someone else's reckless choices. And for the first time in months, that future actually felt within reach. After weeks of back-and-forth nonsense, I finally got a glimpse of what life could look like without Emma's constant chaos. It wasn't perfect. Balancing work, taking care of the kids, and dealing with the legal stuff was still a lot. But for once, it actually felt like I was moving in the right direction. Emma stayed with her mom, which meant the house was quieter. The kids still had their visitation days with her, and while I did my best to keep things civil for their sake, it wasn't always easy. During one of her visits, the kids came home with questions. My youngest, looking up at me with big, curious eyes, asked, "Is the baby gonna live with us someday?" I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "No," I said gently. "The baby is staying with Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jason." My oldest frowned. "But Mom had the baby. Doesn't that mean he's kinda like our little brother?" I rubbed the back of my neck. How do you explain surrogacy to kids? How do you make them understand that their mom's choices had nothing to do with them, without making her look bad? I kept my voice calm. "Mom helped bring the baby into the world," I explained. "But it's different from when she had you guys. This baby isn't coming to live with us. He's part of Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jason's family." My oldest nodded slowly, trying to process it. I could see the gears turning in their head. My youngest, though, wasn't satisfied. "But why isn't the baby like us?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that are different from what we expect," I said carefully. "But no matter what, you and your siblings are what's important to me." They didn't push further, but I could tell the conversation stuck with them. It stuck with me, too. Meanwhile, I had my own mess to deal with. The divorce wasn't just emotionally draining, it was financially draining, too. Emma's lawyer was pushing for spousal support, arguing that she couldn't work because of the baby. I sat across from my lawyer, shaking my head in disbelief. "She chose this," I said. "I didn't agree to any of it, and now she wants me to pay for it?" My lawyer nodded, flipping through the paperwork. "That's what they're pushing for. But we have a strong case. The baby isn't yours. This was a surrogacy agreement she willingly entered into. She has her sister and brother-in-law for support." It felt like no matter how many boundaries I set, Emma kept finding ways to drag me back in. She would call. She would text. Usually when she was in the middle of some crisis, expecting me to step in and fix it. One afternoon, I was at work when my phone started buzzing. "Emma." I debated ignoring it, but I knew if I didn't answer, she'd just keep calling. With a sigh, I picked up. "What is it, Emma?" She was crying. "Ethan, I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I can't afford daycare for the baby, and I have to start looking for work. I need you to help me, just a little. Just until I get back on my feet." I leaned back in my chair, pinching the bridge of my nose. And here we go again. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Emma, the baby is not my responsibility. You have Sarah and Jason, that's their child." Her voice sharpened with frustration. "They can't help me right now." I exhaled slowly, pushing back the irritation creeping into my voice. "No, Emma. What's happening is you don't like the consequences of your decisions, and now you want me to fix them. But I'm not doing that anymore." Silence. Then, a sharp, bitter laugh. "You really are heartless, Ethan." Before I could respond, she hung up. I stared at my phone for a second, shaking my head. 5 minutes later, another notification popped up, a message from her mother. "I can't believe you would turn your back on the mother of your children. I always thought you were a decent man, but I guess I was wrong. How can you be so cruel?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. Right on cue. I typed back a response, my fingers moving without hesitation. "Even I was surprised when I found out your daughter was the kind of woman who would sacrifice her own family just to sleep with her brother-in-law. So spare me the lecture on decency, you old hag, and stop texting me." I hit send and didn't give it a second thought. It didn't stop there. Emma kept running into roadblocks, and every single time, instead of turning to Sarah or Jason, she tried to drag me back into her mess. At first, I kept my responses polite but firm whenever she or her family reached out, trying to guilt me into helping. But over time, I realized it was pointless. No matter how logically I explained my position, they twisted my words, painted me as the villain. So eventually, I stopped responding altogether. It wasn't my job to bail her out. It never was. and I refused to let her guilt me into thinking otherwise. Despite everything, there were moments when I almost felt sorry for her. Every time I saw her, she looked more and more worn down, like the weight of her choices was finally catching up to her. One evening, during a custody exchange, she hesitated before speaking. "Can we talk privately for a minute?" she asked, her voice unusually soft. I hesitated but nodded. "Yeah, sure." We stepped a few feet away from the kids, and she took a deep breath, avoiding my eyes. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she murmured. "For everything. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I really thought I was doing the right thing at the time. I didn't know how to respond to that." Part of me wanted to tell her it was way too late for apologies. Another part wanted to ask why she didn't think about the consequences before she went through with all of this. But in the end, I just nodded. "I hope things work out for you," I said simply. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I wasn't interested in reopening old wounds. Whatever regret she felt, whatever guilt she was carrying, that was her burden, not mine. The divorce was long, messy, and exhausting. But in the end, I won the only thing that mattered, the kids. The court ruled in my favor. Full custody. Emma would get visitation rights, but I would be the one making the decisions, providing them with a stable home. It was a relief, but not a victory. Because in situations like this, no one really wins. The only thing that mattered was making sure the kids were okay. Emma fought hard to paint herself as the victim. Her lawyer argued that she had made a selfless decision, that she had only done what she thought was best for her family. But the court wasn't blind to reality. They saw what I had seen all along. That Emma was unreliable. That she made impulsive choices without considering the consequences. That she had used our children as leverage to get what she wanted. I sat there, listening to her attorney drone on about how difficult things had been for her, how much she loved the children, how she deserved shared custody. And for a brief second, I wondered, would the judge actually buy into this? But then my lawyer stood up and laid everything out. The instability, the broken promises, the times Emma had put herself before our kids. He pointed out that for months, I had been their primary caregiver while Emma struggled to get her life together. And the evidence spoke for itself. When the judge made the final ruling, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Emma would get scheduled visitation, but I would be the one ensuring that our kids had a home, had stability, had the security they needed. I glanced over at her. For a second, she looked like she was about to cry. Maybe she had convinced herself that the court would side with her. Maybe she thought she'd walk out with more. But reality had finally caught up with her. Afterward, she tried to talk to me in the hallway outside the courtroom. "I don't want things to be like this," she said, her voice shaking. "I still want to be in their lives." I met her eyes, my tone even. "That's up to you. But I won't let them be dragged into chaos. If you show up for them, great. If not, I'll make sure they're okay either way." She nodded, wiping at her eyes, but I didn't stick around. There was nothing left to say. Now, it's just me and the kids, figuring things out one day at a time. There are challenges, sure. Single parenting isn't easy. But for the first time in a long time, our home feels steady, peaceful. And that's worth everything I had to go through. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.